Oh, it very much pleases me to introduce our first featured poet of the evening, or well, the evening where I am. For some folks, it's of the event, the first featured poet of the event, um, Mandy Haggith. Mandy Haggith lives in Essendon, Scotland. I hope I pronounced it right, and teaches literature and creative writing at the University of the Highlands and Islands, where she runs a tree poetry project, AB Tree, inspired by the Gaelic tree alphabet. Her books include four poetry collections, most recently Why the Sky is Far Away by Red Squirrel Press in 2019, a tree poetry anthology, a non-fiction book about paper, and five novels. She has been poet in residence at the Royal Botanical Gardens in Edinburgh and at Inverewe Garden. And Mandy, I don't know if you know this, but I always start off with giving a little bit of a reflection about the poems that I read and what I thought of it. And what struck me first is how the land, the sea, and the nature really form the heart of your poems. And there's a love for nature that speaks through your poems, but also attention and care. And nature or natural elements often form the basis of the poem and reflect and strengthen its central message or image. And I found it really uh, alive in a poem called Matsukaze, which is a Japanese word for wind blowing through pines, where you have the stanza, Thursday, I perfect the art of pining under quiet pines. And for me, that sort of sums up so much about your work. And I found many of your poems reminiscent of Japanese painting in the sense that there's so much attention for the essential, a brush stroke that illuminates forms, outlines, and with that, or perhaps even beyond that, a sudden insight. And in everything, I felt that these poems not so much depict the world, but are part of it, live in it, and breathe some sorely needed magic into it. And I always ask a question before we start the reading. And this time I found a poetry quote by Anne Sexton, who said, "One of my secret instructions to myself as a poet is, whatever you do, don't be boring." So I thought, Mandy, do you have any secret instructions to yourself as a poet? And if so, what is it?
Um, I think yeah, it's a great question. I think there are two. One of them is to always question whether I need to be there, or whether the things that I'm writing about are better written about by me getting out of the way. And the second thing is something that I was taught by my tutor and mentor. I was lucky enough to study with Tom Leonard, the Glaswegian poet, and he taught me that it was really important to notice the texture of a poem, not only its text. And yeah, I carry that around with me a lot.
Well, those are both great instructions. So now let's hear the poetry they led to.
Okay, thanks. Thank you first very much indeed for having me here, and thank you all very much for coming to listen. And I'm delighted, and that introduction is really quite overwhelming. Really, I'm really delighted that my poetry has said that to you, because that means a lot to me. Thank you. So I'm going to just read two poems, but they're both quite long, and so. Yeah, but yeah, it seemed to me easier than trying to make a sort of patchwork. Sometimes, poetry reading is a sort of patchwork quilt that you try to make. This is just a game of two halves. The first poem is called Alphabet, and it's inspired by a poem by the same name, by Inger Christensen, the Danish poet. And I wrote it when my mother died in 2016. I found myself unable to write anything for quite a long time. And Inger Christensen's poem was the poem that broke me open. And it was the poem that inspired me to try to do something akin to what she had done, which was she followed the Fibonacci series, in fact, that she started with the letter A and wrote a one-line poem, and then the letter B and wrote a two-line poem, and followed away on. What I've done is simpler than that. I've covered, she stopped at about J because the stanzas were getting so incredibly long. But I actually went all the way through to the end of the alphabet, but instead of using the Fibonacci sequence, I just simply have the first letter of the alphabet is 1 line, the second 2 lines, the third 3 lines. And so each of the stanzas works up to M, which is 13 lines long, and then works its way back down to Z, which is once again only 1 line long. And so this is alphabet. Each stanza has its own little subtitle. Affirmation. Ash trees are, therefore life is. Beginning. Birches, bracken, brambles and birds, a burach, a beautiful burach. Continuation. At the coast, a rock-sea confusion. Crows cruise, caw, congregate on a corpse. Corrupting carbohydrates become compost. Death. Dandelions are, dunnocks are, dad is. I feel down, I don't do, I doubt. Duties are doubled, but dandelions are, and daffodils definitely are too. Elegy. Evening comes, everything exists. Everything nothing, everything exists, evening comes. Fire. I find fire, flames, fog, finches, frogs, and friends. Looking at the future, fear, fruit, fiction, and freedom flourish. Fortunes do not. Grave. Good grey ground. Silence. Good grey ground. Happiness. You would want us not to grieve too long. So I go to the old hazel tree and lie down here and now where you are no longer. You taught me never to hate anyone, no matter how horrible they seem. We have choices all life long until the end. My hormones are changing, hot flushes happen. The hazel catkins open tiny yellow flowers. Imagination. An ivory carving conjures the Iron Age into the present. Indigo sky, instant tempest. Inside others, intractable secrets. The inner workings of a mind make the impossible possible. Justice. Better than a joke, seeing a wrong righted. Take money from the rich and give it to the poor. Is it so difficult? Just listen, stop and help. Gang up together against the powerful for good. Jam tomorrow. Killing. Does the kingfisher give itself up to the hawk? Is kelp thrown up onto the beach, clinging with its holdfast to a stone, murdered by the sea? Is my omelette haunted by unborn feathers and clucking? Frosted frog spawn on the pond, bones along the shore. Lots of letters, lots of lilies and daffodils, lots of leaves, lots of liverworts and mosses, lots of lovely lichens, lots of little animals, woodlice, earwigs, beetles, lots of lions, cats, statues and flags, lots of lying around, lots of lying for your life, lots of life, lots of loose ends, lots of love. Mum. Mourning my mother means missing maternal messages. Months minus mum, memories must make do. Now. The day he had to leave, I sat with my brother by mum's bedside crying. Go back to your little family, she said, they need you. We talked about the nursery trees in the Pacific rainforest where he lives. Great cedars that live 1,000 years, stand dead 500 more, then fall to feed another generation. They give their nitrogen, nutrients, nature. Even as only a long, low mound in the woods, the mother tree gives everything to nourish her offspring. only. As there is no omniscient being, no omnipotent force, we must be optimistic as we go from our origins to oblivion, from the open-mouthed yowl to our obituary. On the way, enjoying owls in osiers, ogres on oboes, onomatopoeia, occasional ornariness or obduracy, and obviously oranges, often. Primroses. Primroses form patches in woods. Primroses' leaves poke through leaf litter. Primroses photosynthesize. Primroses are peaceful. Primrose petals are so delicate, so pale, so pretty. Primrose flowers are pin or thrum, gender balanced. Primroses are politically correct. Primroses withstand perishing spring weather. Primroses point the way to perfection. Cues. Quietly I grieve. Quickly I write, questioning everything. Quietly spring comes. Quickly bracken unfurls, questioning nothing. Quietly we die. Quickly we forget, questioning everything. How quick we are to question questions. Rest. Resting on water, I realized recreation is possible. I remember a red coat, red lips, roots grow slowly, reaching inexorably into rock. Spring. Between squalls, the sun sometimes shrugs, shuffles in, soothing. Sepals unsheathe, shoots stretch, soon a green sheen. Time. Trip plans, travel schedules, table of departures, terrorist clock, tormentor, tomorrow petty pace, tribulation. Under. A woven coffin carried by 6 strong people, living, crying. We have put daffodils into the earth. Vim. After primroses come violets. After wind comes velocity. After wheels comes vehicles. After conviction comes vehemence. After patience comes virtue. Wonder. Wild wet wind in the wiggly woods. A beetle's sunset oil sheen, a fern unfurling, a welter of questions about the world. X-ray. A clot blocking one lung. Advanced cancer. No choice but exit. Yes. You are young yet, she said. Live on. So, yeast, yacht, and yellow flowers. Zone. We go from zoology to zenith to zero. Okay. So thank you very much. That was alphabet. And the second poem I'm going to read is called, and so that was from, that's in Why the Sky is Far Away. So that's my most recent collection. And the next one I'm going to read is, I actually wrote it before that. I wrote it some years ago. But hopefully it's in the next, it's in fact the title poem of the next collection, which is A Passion for Ascent. And that's a phrase from a poem. So that it begins with a quote from Norman Mackay, who wrote, he spent a lot of time in Ascent, where I live in the northwest of Scotland, which he called this most beautiful corner of the land, and he was right. And it starts with a quote from his big long poem called A Man in Ascent. And this is this long poem is my response to A Man in Ascent. And the quote is, a visiting eye, an unrequited passion. This ice sculpted Loch and Nocken space is still the most beautiful corner of the land. The air prevaricates on, the ups still lift, the hollows still astound, with sphagnum art and puddlecraft. The tide glides out and slides back in again. Tourists, though he wouldn't use the word, not seeing himself as one, continue to come. Maybe even wearier now of our much newer civilization, the clock's tyranny out there is strong as ever. Here, natural rhythms perpetuate, day and night, moon and season. His questions pointed at true north, a compass bearing that has driven men in boats and folk inland on a journey he'd be proud of. Who owns this land? Loch Roe, Clachtol, the pools in Store, the Fanks, Clashnessie Bay, our litany of mountains, Culbeg, Culmore, Sullivan, Canis, they're ours, the local peoples, crofters, women even, all who live here, who fought and won, raised the funds to share the rights to this rock bog woodloch land. We possess and it belongs to us. But what he knew was that we owned it all already. And though we have the title now, its text does not express the two-way deal. It is also us who belong to it. It remains masterless. Sullivan's snow-clad, sun-drenched, an iced pudding in a bowl of cream, as delicious as it's always been and always will be. Nothing we do changes the mountains, though I swear they gleamed the day we bought them. He asked if owning has anything to do with love. I answer him, everything and nothing. It's a marriage made in a solicitor's office. The deeds are silent about what matters. Yet it was passion for this place that drove the people to rewrite its history, to wrest the land from rich and absent men. The mountains are unaffected. Lochans do not care. The sea's as merciless as always, still practicing arpeggios on the beaches, ready for wild jazz jabbling in the Minch, ragged as ever, robbed of its fish, pulsing in and out of a harbour he wouldn't recognise. No boats tied up unloading catches from whiskey-drinking fishermen. The bar landlocked, fish market an empty hangar, a tanker full of cage-grown salmon, and a row of French and Spanish freezer lorries vacuuming up the guts of deep-sea ships. In Lochimba, the ancient smell of brine, seaweed, and fish is laced, for the time being at least, with diesel. Outside, it's the old Atlantic perfume, great westerly gusts of it, soft and wet and welcome as a grandmother's tea. They say trouble's brewing in the ocean, the great web of feeders and fed collapsing. For now, though, dolphins line dance northwards past Slate and Sawyer, and beneath them sand eels shoal to a deep sea transpeat. The untiring tide has worked its shifts. At the end of the winter, the thaw is slow. Toads keep to their secret places. Great tits teach in treetops. Woodcock blunder among birches, dodging bullets. We argue, of course. This is still Ascent. Less poaching than in his day, maybe, but no fewer devastating views. He watched folk waning, eking a subsistence from acid soils, which he called dying acres. Seeing abandoned lambing fields, larachs, rushes, heathered lazy beds untilled. But was it death he saw, or people tiring of the struggle to yoke the land to their control? How do we tell if a land dies or thrives? Whose assessment of life and death do we believe? The March crofter who sets a match to heather and lets the muir burn? Or the children counting dragonflies by Loch Bianna on a summer afternoon? Who loves this land the best? The hunter coming in with a stag on the back of his quad, or the woman heaving a basket of sea-wrack to her berry patch in the Rowan wood? Another non-question, like ownership. Our love is shared and various, and as unlikely to run dry as the rosary of lochs, Uragil Cam, Verti Fuin, fingered by streams, their destiny the gushing fervour of the Kirkake. Yet it too swells and wanes to the pulse of seasons. Spring comes, polytunnels flourish, Rowanberries will feed the fieldfare's skirmish. Woods regenerate where teeth and hooves desist. Seals feed in the fjord. Otters glide out on the rising waters. Ravens tumble and gannets plunge and lift and ride the sky. The land lives despite what we do or fail to do. Schemes start, abort. Traditions grow and cease. The land lives on. A tide of people ebbed and turned. New generations replenish the land, coming into our own, coming in, to renew the unrequitable passion. Thanks very much for listening.